I was briefly talking online today with Jason Hughes, Mr. Mephisto's Geek Manifesto, about Star Wars, particularly Star Wars combat, and specifically, well, how do you start a Star Wars combat? Things like what range should the opponents appear at, and that sort of thing. It's a pretty interesting discussion, but texting back and forth on my phone isn't exactly the most conducive way to have a conversation. So I thought I might do a sort of video response. Well, how do you start a combat like this in space? From my point of view, because you're dealing with a planetary system, the characters, whoever they are, have had to come to that planet and at least give some passing thought to leaving that planet. There should be a lot of information that's made available to the players before they have to engage any forces. Exception to that would be coming out of hyperspace and discovering things, but there's not a lot really that prevents you from just turning around and leaving again if what you see is not to your liking. The thing which dictates a lot of let's say stranger awareness to a new system are sensors. There's a sensor range listing with each ship, and often the sensor range will match the weapons loadout. So if you're talking about a starfighter, which is given close range weapons, very often they will have a sensor suite that is limited to close range. An exception would be the A-Wing, which goes all the way out to medium range, and they're listed kind of as a multi-role fighter with a lot of scouting abilities, although really they're a missile delivery device. So if your weapons ranges can be thought of as like the default sensor range for most ships out there, and if someone has to sit down and actively use sensors, which is a computer's check, to search for something specific, and by doing so can extend the sensor range by one range band. What this means is, from a certain point of view, you don't really have to wonder at what range do I have to position the ships for a fair encounter. You really only have to be aware of at what range can your particular characters on their particular ship detect incoming opponents or targets or pursuers or whatnot. So in a rebel operatives visit a planet kind of scenario, or smugglers are moving from planet to planet sort of thing, it makes sense to inform them about what the underworld has to say about the normal defenses of that area. And when they come in from the jump point, from the hyperspace entry point, and make their way into the system, what did they notice on the way in? Was there a space station or some kind of port authority in orbit? Are there picket ships? Are there star destroyers forming a blockade, or is some other group like the CSA empowered to have a blockade there? What did they see on the way in? What does that mean about their opposition on the way out? If there are capital ships in orbit, as we talked about in the combat video, they like to operate within medium range of an opponent. So standing off from the orbit of the planet, medium range, makes a certain amount of sense if they're there to control access and egress from the planet. So that would be something to prepare for. When we try and blast out of here, we know that somewhere within medium range of the edge of the atmosphere, we're going to encounter, or we'll have the chance to encounter, the Star Destroyer. Where exactly is it going to be? A good smuggler in tune with the pulse of the underworld of that place might try and become aware of the posted Imperial schedules. What is their normal schedule? Or, is it a crack crew that's operating in this place? And do they vary their schedules and have a high degree of personal security? Is it always going to be a surprise, if you blast out of atmosphere, whether or not it's going to be sitting there, in your way or not? Will this be a pursuit, or will you be headed right into their teeth if you're trying to be surreptitious and sneak away on the far side of the planet? Do they have reinforcements? Do they have regular patrols out? And at what range would these be? And would these be circular or somehow spherical or modulating patrol paths at a particular range band? They don't really have to chase you down if they're in the right place to anticipate, where you're going to go. You are on the way to coming to them, sometimes completely in the blind as to whether or not they're there. So sensors are the first aspect to consider when starting a space combat. The next is, how does the pursuer, especially if they don't start out within sensor range of each other, how are they made aware of what they are pursuing? If it's an Imperial force, what kind of telemetry or communication are they engaged in with their fleet? The Star Destroyers have sensor ranges out to long or farther. And so they're blanketing this massive area and very well aware, even on a passive setting, everything that's coming and going. And they'll be directing their TIE fighters or their interceptors to chase them down, but that ship still needs to acquire its target. It's following its instructions. It's been given a heading. Still it needs to acquire the target, make its own sensor determination, and then begin its attack run. And so there's a moment there for the crew to react, to notice the active sensor pinging from the pursuing ship, and to recognize just how close it is and do their quick identification of what kind of ship it is, and just how cooked their goose might be if it's something that they're not prepared to handle. And then madly, if they need to run, start making their astrogation calculations, or if they need to turn and fight, look for some place in this system where that fight can happen that will give them some kind of advantage. So how do you begin a space battle? As with, I suppose, any prepared for improv encounter, the amount of information that you're going to have to use, you need to have it in mind, and then assessed for how much of this should be automatically in the player's hands as a matter of course. How much should they have to work to figure out? If you're doing ambushes like pirate attacks or things like that, you don't have to be nice. The opponents have taken the time to set up an ambush. How well does it go off? Well, you've got the vigilance checks of your crew to deal with an ambush setting, but you also have the planning, the strategic capabilities of your pirate crew. Maybe they get a lot of threats, and there are a lot of clues there that you can present to the players and see if they twig to the fact an ambush is coming. Lots of things are open, because ultimately we're trying to model the experience of Star Wars, that excitement and these people of varying capabilities. When Luke starts out, he's all this raw potential but no real experience, but he very quickly starts moving up the ranks of the Rebel Alliance, because in the right place at the right time, and through the virtue of the Force or his own native talents as a pilot, he can deal with tough situations. So again, even your starter characters may surprise you with the kind of amazing plans or the amazing reactions they pull off, even if you think you might have overpowered the opposition. I guess with any role-playing encounter, the idea is to be fair. And I don't mean fair in a balanced encounter or some threat rating or whatever. I mean fair in that the information that the player characters and the players should have, they have. And that's really, in my opinion, how you start a space combat. I hope this was at least a little bit helpful.